there came a sound. It was a clear, metallic sound that left the vibration of steel in the air, and Philip leaned over the edge of the rock. Below him the shadow was broken into a pool of rippling starlight. He heard the faint dip of paddles, and suddenly a canoe shot from the shadow out into the clear light of the moon and stars. It was a large canoe. In it he could make out 4 figures. 3 of them were paddling. The 4th sat motionless in the bow. They passed under him swiftly, guiding their canoe so that it was soon hidden in the shelter of the cliff. By the faint reflections cast by the disturbed water, Philip saw that the occupants of the canoe had made an effort to conceal themselves by following the course of the dense shadow. Only the chance sound had led him to observe them. Under ordinary circumstances, the passing of a strange canoe at night would have had no significance for him, but at the present time it troubled him. The manner of its approach through the shadow, the strange quiet of its occupants, the stealth with which they had shot the canoe under the cliff, were all unusual. Could the incident have anything to do with Jeanne and Pierre? He waited until he heard the tiny bell in his watch tinkle the half hour, and then he set out slowly over the moonlit rocks to the north. Jeanne and Pierre would surely come from that direction. It was impossible to miss them. He walked without sound in his moccasins, keeping close to the edge of the cliff so that he could look out over the bay. 200 or 300 yards beyond the big rock the sea wall swung in sharply, disclosing the open water, like a still, silvery sheet, for a mile or more. Philip scanned it for the canoe, but as far as he could see there was not a shadow. For a quarter of a mile he walked over the rocks, then returned. It was 9 o'clock. The moment had arrived for the appearance of Jeanne and Pierre. He resumed his patrol of the cliff, and with each moment his nervousness increased. What if Jeanne failed him? What if she did not come to the rock? The mere thought made his heart sink with a sudden painful throb. Until now the fear that Jeanne might disappoint him, that she might not keep the tryst, had not entered his head. His faith in this girl, whom he had seen but twice, was supreme. A second and a third time he patrolled the quarter mile of cliff. Again his watch tinkled the half hour, and he knew that the last minutes of the appointed time had come. The third and last time he went beyond the quarter mile limit, searching in the white distances beyond. A low wind was rising from the bay. It rustled in the spruce and balsam tops of the forest that reached up to the barren whiteness of the rock plateau on which he stood. Under him he heard, growing more and more distinct, the moaning wash of the swelling tide. A moment of despair possessed him, and he felt that he had lost. Suddenly the wind brought to him a different sound, a shout far down the cliff, a second cry, and then the scream of a woman, deadened by the wash of the sea and the increasing sweep of the wind among the trees. He stood for a moment powerless, listening. The wind lulled, and the woman's cry now came to him again, a voice that was filled with terror rising in a wild appeal for help. With an answering shout he ran like a swift-footed animal along the cliff. It was Jeanne who was calling. Who else but Jeanne would be out there in the gray night? Jeanne and Pierre. He listened as he ran, but there came no other sound. At last he stopped, and drew in a great breath to send out a shout that would reach their ears. Above the fierce beating of his heart, the throbbing intake of his breath, he heard sounds which were not of the wind or the sea. He ran on, and suddenly the cliff dropped from under his feet, and he found himself on the edge of a great rift in the wall of rock, looking across upon a strange scene. In the brilliant moonlight, with his back against a rock, stood Pierre, his glistening rapier in his hand, His thin, lithe body bent for the attack of three men who faced him. It was but a moment's tableau. The men rushed in. Muffled cries, blows, a single clash of steel, and Pierre's voice rose above the sound of conflict. "For the love of God, give me help, M'sieur!" He had seen Philip rush up to the edge of the break in the cliff, and as he fought he cried out again. "Shoot, M'sieur! In a moment it will be too late!" Philip had drawn his heavy revolver. He watched for an opportunity. The men were fighting now so that Pierre had been forced between his assailants and the breach in the wall. There was no chance to fire without hitting him. "Run, Pierre!" shouted Philip. "Run!" He fired once over the heads of the fighters, and as Pierre suddenly darted to one side in obedience to his command there came for the first time a shot from the other side. The bullet whistled close to his ears. A second shot, and Pierre fell down like one dead among the rocks. Again Philip fired, a third and a fourth time, and one of the three who were disappearing in the white gloom stumbled over a rock and fell as Pierre had fallen. His companion stopped, picked him up, and staggered on with him. Philip's last shot missed, and before he could reload they were lost among the upheaved masses of the cliff. "Pierre!" he called. "Ho! Pierre Couchee!" There was no answer from the other side. He ran along the edge of the break, and in the direction of the forest he found a place where he could descend. In his haste he fell. His hands were scratched. Blood flowed from a cut in his forehead when he dragged himself up to the face of the cliff again. He tried to shout when he saw a figure drag itself up among the rocks, but his almost superhuman exertions had left him voiceless. His wind whistled from between his parted lips when he came to Pierre. Pierre was supporting himself against a rock. His face was streaming with blood. In his hand he held what remained of the rapier, which had broken off close to the hilt. His eyes were blazing like a madman's, and his face was twisted with an agony that sent a thrill of horror through Philip. "My hurt is nothing, nothing, M'sieur," he gasped, understanding the look in Philip's face. "It is Jeanne. They have gone with Jeanne." The rapier slipped from his hand and he slid weakly down against the rock. Philip dropped upon his knees and with his handkerchief began wiping the blood from the half-breed's face. For a few moments Pierre's head hung limp against his shoulder. "What is it, Pierre?" he urged. "Tell me, quick! They have gone with Jeanne?" Pierre's body grew rigid. With one great effort he seemed to marshal all of his strength, and straightened himself. "Listen, M'sieur," he said, speaking calmly. "They set upon us as we were going to meet you at the rock. There were 4. One of them is dead, back there. The others, with Jeanne, have gone in the canoe. It is death, worse than death, for her." His body writhed. In a passion he strove to rise to his feet. Then with a groan he sank back, and for a moment Philip thought he was dying. "I will go, Pierre," he cried. "I will bring her back. I swear it." Pierre's hand detained him as he went to rise. "You swear?" "Yes." "At the next break there is a canoe. They have gone for the Churchill." Pierre's voice was growing weaker. In a spasm of sudden fear at the dizziness which was turning the night black for him, he clutched at Philip's arm. "If you save her, M'sieur, do not bring her back," he whispered hoarsely. "Take her to Fort o' God. Lose not an hour, not a minute. Trust no one. Hide yourselves. Fight. Kill. But take her to Fort o' God. You will do this, M'sieur? You promise?" He fell back limp. Philip lowered him gently. holding his head so that he could look into the